Welcome to The Explainer. I am so incredibly thrilled to have you here today because, well, we've got a really fascinating mission ahead of us. We are going to completely dismantle one of the most stubborn and honestly misleading ideas in modern history, the myth of the overnight genius. We've all seen the movies, right? A lone inventor stares intensely at a chalkboard, a light bulb miraculously turns on, and suddenly, boom, they've changed the world. Well, today, through a few really incredible historical stories, we're going to pull back the curtain and look at the actual anatomy of a breakthrough.
Okay, let's dive into this. Consider this number, 5,126. It's massive, and right now, it's totally unexplained. What could it possibly represent? Is it a distance? Maybe the amount of lines of code in a program? Or the number of days someone spent obsessing over a single problem? I want you to keep this number in your mind because it represents something so monumental and, frankly, so agonizing that it forms the absolute bedrock of what it takes to actually innovate.
And here is your answer. That staggering number represents the exact amount of failed prototypes Sir James Dyson built before he finally perfected his revolutionary bagless vacuum. 5,126 failures. I mean, just think about the sheer emotional endurance that takes. Our core theme today is built right into this quote. True breakthroughs, they just do not happen effortlessly. They require a relentless, almost unreasonable tolerance for failure.
So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to deconstruct the innovator's mindset using 4 wildly different historical stories. We'll hit the myth of the genius, ignoring the experts, abstracting the problem, the power of persistent failure, the silent proof, and finally, forging your own path. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The myth of the genius, shattering the aha moment. As a society, we really tend to romanticize the act of invention as the sudden stroke of brilliance. We love a good eureka moment. But that romanticized vision is actually pretty harmful because it makes us feel like if we aren't suddenly struck by lightning, we aren't innovators. But let's use James Dyson's own words as the philosophical glue for our analysis today. He says, stumbling upon the next great invention in an aha moment is a myth. Real progress is gritty, it's grueling, it's a heavily iterative process. It's really about getting your hands dirty, trying something, watching it break, and then figuring out exactly why it broke.
Section 2. Ignoring the experts, bridging the gap.
Let's travel back to a sticky, stiflingly hot city office in Houston, Texas, in the early 1930s. We're going to see this defiant mindset in action. The Great Depression is in full swing, budgets are basically non-existent, and a critical bridge needs to be replaced. This brings us to another brilliant insight from Dyson, ignoring conventional experience. And this perfectly describes J.G. Mackenzie. He was a municipal bridge engineer in Houston, tasked with a literally impossible problem. Span a 100-foot clear distance over Buffalo Bayou with absolutely no money. The established authorities, the so-called experts, insisted on standard practices. But Mackenzie realized that to solve the impossible, he had to completely disregard those experts.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast in these two approaches. The conventional, expert way was to use a massive steel superstructure, but the bids for that came back at over $175,000, which was way over budget. So what was Mackenzie's wildly unconventional method? He used reinforced concrete edge girders, but rather than standardizing them, he actually mapped the physical shape of the girders directly to the curve of the moment diagram produced by the applied loads. Using simple, cheap plywood forms, he shaped the concrete to exactly match the forces acting upon it. It is just a stunning physical metaphor for spanning a gap with pure ingenuity.
The experts were completely baffled. In fact, many who were considered authorities flat out said it could not be done. Yet, Mackenzie's 1932 McKee Street Bridge achieved an unheard-of 120-foot concrete span. And here's the absolute best part, it still stands beautifully today, carrying modern traffic. It's literal physical proof of the immense value of having a healthy, rebellious disregard for the experts.
So, we can clearly see how this mindset builds a bridge out of concrete. But what if the problem you are trying to solve isn't physical at all? What if you're trying to wrangle something completely invisible?
Section 3. Abstracting the problem. Signal from the noise.
Let's move from the sweaty physical engineering of a 1930s bridge to the purely theoretical realm of 1948. Enter Claude Shannon. He was a lone genius who sought a grand unified theory for something completely ethereal, communication itself. We can perfectly frame Shannon's approach with Dyson's philosophy again. You have to do things the wrong way to discover the unknown. Back in the 1940s, the right way to think about communication was deterministic signal reconstruction. Engineers were completely obsessed with the physical wires.
constantly trying to figure out how to push a distorted analog signal through a specific medium, while Shannon looked at it entirely differently. He ignored the wires completely and looked instead at probabilistic uncertainty.
Shannon brilliantly isolated the true essence of the problem. He realized the key to communication isn't the physical signal, it's the uncertainty of the message. Think about it. If you already know exactly what I'm going to say, there's no point in me communicating it. So, he shifted the entire problem from physical physics to abstract probability, utilizing a revolutionary new concept, the bit. He used the bit as the fundamental, universal unit of uncertainty.
And this brilliantly illustrates Shannon's elegant formula, which completely pruned the massive, complicated tree of communications knowledge into one simple, beautiful rule. Step 1, he defined the entropy rate, or H, as the minimum bits per second needed to represent the information. Step 2, the system capacity, or C, is the absolute speed limit for reliable communication through the noise. And Step 3, reliable communication happens if and only if H is less than C. It's kind of like water in a pipe. If the flow is less than the capacity, it gets through.
This single profound realization that it is always most efficient to encode information into bits before transmitting it, regardless of whether it's a Shakespeare sonnet or a Beethoven symphony, birthed the entire modern digital information age. Literally everything, from optical networks to the 5G standards currently rolling out, relies entirely on Shannon's mathematical abstraction.
So we have the technical victories. We know we must fail to learn, and we must abstract the problem to see its true essence. But here's the really hard question. If failure and isolation are essential to breakthroughs, how do we actually survive the emotional toll of the journey?
Section 4. The power of persistent failure, endurance and observation.
Let's bring our focus fully onto the psychological mindset of the innovator, returning to James Dyson and his early, agonizing struggles. His actual playbook for emotional resilience really comes down to 4 rules. First up, you've got to welcome failure as a teacher. Literally enjoy it, because success teaches you nothing. Second, trust your instincts over market research. When focus groups told Dyson a clear vacuum bin was a terrible idea, he ignored them and trusted his gut. Third, maintain a passionate anger about things that just don't work well. And finally, remain permanently dissatisfied. Dyson's refusal to just tart up a competitor's product and sell out kept his focus squarely on solving the actual underlying problem. He endured the pain because he was entirely obsessed with the solution.
Section 5. The silent proof, the ultimate intrinsic reward.
I want to talk about a modern mathematician who solved one of the world's most impossible problems and then simply disappeared, untethered by the world's applause, guided only by the logic of discovery. You know, in a world utterly obsessed with chasing clicks and awards, this mathematician embodies the ultimate execution of Dyson's rule. You do the work for the intrinsic joy of the truth, not the acclaim, not the money. When you are truly pushing the boundaries of human knowledge, the silent proof is its own reward.
Section 6. Forging your own path, the anatomy complete. Look at what we've covered today. A concrete bridge built by defying the experts, an abstract formula that birthed the digital age, a vacuum built on 5,126 failures, and a silent proof born of pure intrinsic motivation. These disparate vignettes form one unified playbook for tackling the impossible. Which brings us to the ultimate question. I want you to look at your own work, your own passions, and ask yourself this. What impossible problem would you solve today if you knew there would be no applause? Embrace the failure, ignore the noise, and get to work. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.